departments in the world, but it took a local Arizona sheriff and his detectives and 2 other forensic analysis sources to prove to the world the fraud that any of them and any of you could have easily determined using a downloaded Adobe program. But they, like all of you, as part of America held in the grip of your own psychotic delusions, or those of you who cower in fear of the delusional screechers, did nothing to prove or disprove the deception which has set the world on fire. 8 years ago, Iraq was pacified. Afghanistan was stable with limited outbreaks of fighting. Cities like Cairo, Aleppo, Paris, Athens, and Berlin were peaceful. Now they are Islamic war zones. Without firing a shot, waves of tens of thousands of Arab Muslims have invaded Greater Europa, unleashing an unchecked torrent of rape and mass murder. Domestic terror group Black Lives Matter has crawled out of the White House and Justice Department to fill America's streets with anti-white and anti-police hatred and violence. Islamo-terrorist ISIS has sprung from the desert sands to carve a bloody niche across the Middle East, Africa, Europe, and the U.S., attacking airports, public transportation, concerts, nightclubs, and Christmas celebrations. Our allies in the United Kingdom and Israel have been poked in the eye and thrown under the jihadi bus. American veterans have been blocked from visiting their own war memorials. Deadly plagues and infected Africans have been allowed to violate nature's laws and 1,000 years of medically recognized quarantine procedure by being transported to the United States, where citizens were exposed and infected by life-threatening virus. While Christians were raped and slaughtered and churches burned in the Middle East and Africa, a paltry 3% of the Middle Eastern refugees are allowed sanctuary in the United States are Christian. Federally purchased firearms were allowed to be put into the hands of Mexican drug cartels and illegal immigrants, which has resulted in the violent murders of American women and children. Healthcare insurance, purchased by millions of producing families, has been stolen and given to lazy non-producers with an unchecked sense of entitlement. American historic and cultural icons like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Captain America, and Superman have been culturally appropriated and race-lifted and are now portrayed as non-whites. The individual who proudly declared he would no longer associate his identity with that of his Caucasian mother's heritage has even special taxed the tanning industry, which caters exclusively to white America. When the sum of Barack Hussein Obama, aka Barry Soetoro, aka Charles Burnell's accomplishments is added, what we have is the most obvious reason why the Founding Fathers were deliberate in their limiting the availability of the executive office to that of citizens thoroughly enmeshed in and invested in preserving the American culture. Obama the Wrecking Ball falls terribly short by every measure as an individual from being both legally eligible and culturally qualified to serve America's greater needs. With that being said, we have to ask, who went through so much trouble to promote, advance, sponsor, protect, and install the most pathetic example of an American executive? Was it the Russians? Was it the Muslims? Was it the geriatric students for a democratic society, hippie socialists? Of course not, you fool. It was us. It was us all along. Little Barry What's-His-Name is one of the many old-school CIA projects concocted in the Cold War era to act as a countermeasure to growing political threats. Just like Martin Luther King was used by the FBI to advance the government's Black Power agenda in the 1960s, Barack Hussein Obama is used to manipulate the Arab Islamist world. Oh, Jim Dynamo, that's really crazy. You've really gotten over the edge now. Have I, little drone? Let's examine Barack Hussein Obama's origin story. Little Barry's mama, Stanley Ann, was raised by communists, as we know. But Stanley's life took some odd twists and turns over the years. Stanley Ann Dunham allegedly met Barack Hussein Obama Sr., a Kenyan national, who was in the U.S. as part of a U.S. Pan-African education program designed to create American-minded, anti-communist African leaders for their own continent in a Russian language class in 1960. Who studied Russian language in the 1960s? The man from U.N.C.L.E., that's who. Stanley Ann would allegedly travel to Kenya, a then hotspot of anti-communist activity promoted by the U.S. and the CIA. After allegedly giving birth to Barack Hussein Obama Jr., Stanley Ann found herself in another international flashpoint, in Indonesia, exactly where and when the CIA Sukarno timeline was in play. Interesting that a little white girl found herself amongst international students in Russian language classes, then in Kenya, then in Indonesia, just as the CIA's involvement in those regions are at their peak. A timely coincidence, of course, but added to the list of anomalies surrounding the mystery man Barack Hussein Obama, and you begin to see a pattern that is surprisingly parallel to known long-term CIA projects. Unfortunately, the men who crafted these programs are gone, and their reserved control no longer holds the rein on projects now compromised by nefarious anti-American agendas. KGB operatives didn't fabricate Obama's forged documents, the amateurishly photoshopped birth certificate, and the cartoon-like Selective Service registration. Muslim Brotherhood spies didn't sneak into the health department of the state of Hawaii and remove the registration documents. 1960s domestic terrorists like Bill Ayers, Charles Manson, and Bernardine Dohrn didn't fabricate college histories at Columbia and Harvard University. It wasn't Hydra or the Red Skull or aliens who sealed all of Barack Hussein Obama's medical and education records and then told the American media to lie about those non-existent documents. It wasn't mind-controlling telepaths who had those same media talking heads attack and malign anybody and everybody who dared point out the glaring inconsistencies in the Barack Hussein Obama story as told by that media. It wasn't the Klan or white supremacists who had Michelle Obama state her spouse was born in Africa.
Barack has led by example. When we took our trip to Africa and visited his home country in Kenya,
It was your government who did all of that. It was your government who foisted a corrupt, uneducated buffoon into the public limelight and onto the American political stage. For nearly a decade, patriotic Americans, intelligent enough to see through the ill-staged kabuki dance, have been attacked and mocked by morons in the American media for daring to declare the obvious. Barack Hussein Obama, if that is his name, is a constitutional criminal, as are all of the members of the DNC and RNC who colluded with his unconstitutional and felonious installment and tenure as America's executive officer. But, shut up. We've heard enough of your pop culture contrarian bullshit to last a lifetime. Your sickening psychosis, your adolescent college campus programming, and mainstream media reinforced Pavlovian talking points has compromised the security of our nation, putting us all in dire jeopardy. Your ignorant nonsense will no longer be tolerated by thinking people. Your attacks on patriots like Sheriff Joe Arpaio and Mike Zullo, men brave enough to defy public hysteria and who rooted out the truth, occulted by far too many so-called independent journalists. Your inability and unwillingness to see things for what they are has resulted in the rape and slaughter of unnamed thousands. Your mindless and cowardly adherence to a political party above the values and protections asserted by our collective culture and need will force any future student of history to look back at you and the sum of your actions and declare you the most dangerous civilian population to walk the earth since the fall of Nazi Germany. Pout. Call me names. Slam doors. You know in your most petulant, contrarian psyche that I am right. The WhiteHouse.gov Barack Hussein Obama birth certificate is a proved fraud and is now the people's unassailable evidence of crimes against the Constitution and felony. We should all thank President-elect Donald J. Trump for having the temerity 4 years ago to defy convention and stand up for the Constitution and American values by demanding Obama produce the document too many clamored to see for far too long. We can thank President-elect Donald J. Trump for forcing the criminal hands controlling the White House to expose without possibility of doubt the absolute corruption of America's laws by our own government agencies. You birther deniers, in your typically inexcusable conspiracy theorist fashion, are a dangerous cancer to a healthy society. You should not only hang your heads in shame, you should never participate in the American electoral process ever again, as you are dangerously unqualified to make adult decisions, as evidenced by the death toll that you have incurred. You have wielded your constitutional rights as might a drunken teenager who recklessly swerves on busy roadways, oblivious to the carnage left in their wake. You are a blight on this society. It is both fortunate and unfortunate that you will never be held to account, just like children, for the chaos that you have collectively unleashed with your defiant naivete and your sophomoric political beliefs. As the hellish tortures you deserve to suffer parallel those your ignorance has condemned others to endure. We can only hope your gods and the universe itself forgives your overwhelming galactic ignorance. Barack Hussein Obama, a.k.a. Barry Soetoro, a.k.a. Harrison J. Burnell, is a fraud. He is a fabrication with no more substance than Clark Kent and Charlie Brown. The individuals in our United States government who spun Barack Hussein Obama from the whole cloth of PC lies and affirmative advancement and inserted him into the artificial matrix of scripted lies and psychological triggers despite their own generations-old directives and best intentions have committed crimes against humanity. The leaders of the DNC and select members of the RNC, a mob of corrupt gangsters who are all guilty of RICO violations and are traitors as defined in 10 U.S. Code 904, aiding the enemy. Society, the very world as we know it, has been brought to the brink of unrecoverable chaos by you, the foolish Democrat voter. You have nothing to say in your defense. You mocked family and friends who told you of your folly, and now there is nothing that you may say that can or will excuse your chosen path of ignorance and insult. Those same yet-to-be-born historians who study this epoch of bedlam we call the now of the 21st century will thank the prescient President-elect for his hand in revealing this greatest fraud played upon the American people. You boomers had everything, but you squandered all that was bequeathed to you, trying to build a world that doesn't exist instead of improving the world that does exist. It's nearly 3 decades overdue, but we have finally wrested the con wheel from your suicidal death grip, and we will reverse course at full speed. You may confine yourself to your quarters. That way you may reflect on the damage that you have done to this world until we reach our destination. The rest of you shall report to your duty stations to await further orders. We have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of wreckage to clear if we're ever going to reach our goals. Helm, correct course. Engine, ahead full. The future waits no longer.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
You've been listening to Jim Dynamo's Bad Machine. Be part of the radio revolution by following our Twitter page @BadMachineRadio and by visiting Jim Dynamo's Bad Machine on Facebook. Bad Machine is a one-man media production, the exclusive owner of all original content. Otherwise, no rights are reserved. 2016.